Raiding in Final Fantasy XIV can be an overwhelming and nerve-wracking experience for newer players, especially if you just started playing in this new Dawntrail expansion. On top of learning how the fight mechanic works, you have to be constantly dealing damage in order to clear the fight itself by doing a proper rotation of your class. To lessen your burden of learning mechanics, I want to suggest you these classes from each role that I personally think is on the easier end, so you can have a better time learning the mechanics of the fight in raids instead of focusing on your personal rotation and dying because your eyes are glued on the freaking hotbar while still doing a decent damage to clear the fight. But before you continue, if you like this type of content, consider subscribing to this channel. If you don't know, my name is Aylaveen and I make weekly 14 videos, mostly yapping and sometimes guides. They're badly written and badly edited, but you should still subscribe because I am forcing you to do so without any benefit whatsoever because I like seeing my numbers go up. So without any further ado, this is Aylaveen and here's my picks for the easiest class in Final Fantasy XIV for each role. Warrior. In all expansions, I always say that Warrior is the most stable of them all. Always reliable and simple enough to play even for newer players that wanted to start as a tank. It has a lot of sustain with heals and lifesteal, also the lowest cooldown of Invuln with Holmgang being a 4-minute cooldown. Warrior's sustainability is so good that you can even do expert dungeons with no healers as long as you press the right button at the right time. The other issues that a lot of new players struggle with is maintaining uptime while dodging the mechanics with melee classes, but worry not because Warrior has the most gap closers out of every other melee class for you to maintain uptime, with 3 onslaughts and 1 primal rend. The last one being somewhat tricky to use because of animation lock, but it's still a gap closer. The way you deal damage is very simple, by using inner release and everything it has to offer every minute, while spending your gauge for Fel Cleaves when it's about to be full. So yes, I would say that Warrior is the easiest tank to play in Dawntrail. But what about the other tanks? I personally think that Paladin is probably a very close second because of its simple rotation and its ability to use magic range skills for downtimes. But drifting and misaligning a self buff from your skills is much more punishing. And while in my opinion Dark Knight used to be the hardest tank, I don't think that is the case anymore in Dawntrail. The Dark Knight right now is very flexible, especially with the gauge requirement removal from Living Shadow, and Delirium being tied to Blood Weapon. So all 3 classes are pretty easy, with the only exception being Gunbreaker due to cartridge management that will always be different depending on how much uptime you have on each fight. White Mage. Talking about healer is easy because there's only 2 for each category of healer, so I just had to pick one of each. And I think it's pretty obvious for both regen healer and shield healer which ones are easier. The first one being White Mage as an easier pick compared to Astro in the regen department. The healing toolkit is very straightforward and you just get lilies over time on combat and use those lilies to heal either a single target or AoE. And after 3 usage of those lilies, you get Afflatus Misery which you use to deal a big damage. Your primary damaging skills apart from that Afflatus Misery will be the Presence of Mind that reduces your cast time and grants you 3 stacks of Glare 4. That is an insta-cast damaging skill which helps for movement. You also have some mitigation skills like Temperance and Divine Caress for AoE and Benison for single targets, and multiple healing enhancing skills such as Asylum and Plenary. With the Dawntrail update, it also becomes easier to play White Mage with an added movement skill called Ethereal Shift with a generous 60-second cooldown to dodge mechanics. And although Lightspeed is nice and overall RDPS is better on Astro because of Divination, it will take more time to learn it and understand the whole card mechanics compared to White Mage that is pretty straightforward. Sage. The other easy healer that belongs to the shielding department is Sage, which I think is quite obviously easier than Scholar. Their primary mechanic is Cardia that heals a partner, usually a tank, every time you deal damage. The secondary one is Eucrasia. This mechanic allows you to change your heals and damaging abilities into shields and DOT, which is pretty cool. Sage's toolkit is kinda similar to White Mage with their 3 Adder Skull that regenerates over time, but unlike White Mage, spending them actually gives you mana instead of Blood Lily like White Mage. These Adder Skull can be used for Carachol and Taro for mitigation or Ixochol and Druacol for heals. Sage has a bunch of mitigation and healing stuff that you can instantly press like Holos and Panhaima. That also comes with a lot of enhancing skills like White Mage such as Philosophia, Crassus, Zoe, and Soteria, which helps you to apply big shields and heals without having to use GCD too much. Sage deals damage primarily from Plekma that comes with 2 stacks, which is an instant cast GCD, and Psyche that comes up every 60 seconds. Because of that instant cast, Plekma allows you to easily move during the burst window. Speaking of movement, Sage is also equipped with Toxicon, another instant cast skill with the same potency as Dosis that allows you to move instead of casting. This Toxicon comes with 3 stacks that became available after your shield breaks. Sage also have another movement option called Icarus that allows you to jump to a friend. This is also very useful when you need to dodge a mechanic just like White Mage. With this amount of movement option and how easy it is to apply shields and mitigation without any DPS loss, I think it's pretty clear that Sage is just easier and simpler to play compared to Scholar. Viper. I think a lot of you might agree when I say that probably Viper, the new class that is just introduced in Dawntrail, is the easiest melee class right now. It's very well designed and simple to understand. Viper's rotation is the epitome of press whatever is glowing, and it's very simple to understand their positionals just from their color, red for rear and green for flank. On top of that, the buttons just turn into new skills every time you use it. This kind of job design also makes your hotbar very clean because it only has a few active buttons, which I kinda like. As a melee class, Viper is very good at disengaging without DPS loss, notably because of Uncoiled Fury. This skill is granted from your Serpent Sire or Vicewinder and is stackable, which makes it very easy to deal damage even when you are forced to have some downtimes. Yes, the job is quite busy during the Awakening window, but every melee is very busy on burst windows and it's not very different from Reapers and Shroud. Viper's Gap Closer Slither is also as good as Monk's that comes with 3 charges and can be targeted to a party member, which helps a lot when you need to dodge a certain mechanic. Samurai has a lot of casting skills from Iaijutsu, Reaper also has some during its burst window, Monk has a rather tricky rotation with no range ability to disengage, and Dragoon has a lot of animation lock because of jumping skills. Viper's direct counterpart Ninja is slightly harder, even though the rotation is rather linear. It also has Tenchi Jin that bounce your movement and the tricky ninjutsu combination, so it's safe to say that Viper is probably the easiest melee right now in Dawntrail. Dancer. In physical range category, I would argue that Dancer is probably the easiest in terms of skill floor. The kit is very simple, you pick a dance partner to buff and you use your dance to keep that buff up at all times. The dance prevents you from dealing damage for some time, but its finisher deals quite a ton. Dancer is kinda similar to Viper in a way that you also do press whatever is glowing, but with larger room for optimization like fan and gauge pulling for your 2-minute burst window. Physical range by default is probably the easiest role in the game. It has no cast time and can deal damage from anywhere with its ranged attack. However, its movement is also restricted, with Bard only having a back jump and Machinist having no movement tool at all. Except for Dancer. Dancer has 3 stacks of an Avant that allows you to dash forward for 10 yalms, which helps a lot when you try to learn a fight and adjust to a certain mechanic. If you compare Dancer to Bard, which has songs to manage, DOT to maintain, or Machinist that has Hypercharge which forces high action per minute, and how Dancer has the most movement option, it is definitely the easiest choice to pick in the physical range category. Summoner. The last one is of course the crown jewel of every easy class in the game, which is from the caster DPS category, Summoner. Since the class rework in Endwalker, Summoner has been the easiest class to play in the entire game. The gameplay is insanely brain-dead and simple that you only need to juggle between your bursts, which is Bahamut or Phoenix, with 3 primals Garuda, Ifrit and Titan. But what makes the Summoner gameplay insanely easy is the fact that even though it's a caster DPS, it only has 3 GCD that needs to be casted per minute, 2 from Ifrit and 1 from Garuda. And you can even eliminate one of them by using Swift Cast if it's not needed. If you compare it to the real casters like Pictomancer or Black Mage, of course this class is obviously easier as it is not as restrictive movement wise because Picto and Black Mage have much more GCDs to be casted. The closest comparison to Summoner is probably Red Mage, and even then, Red Mage is still harder as it needs more cast and has a lot of restriction with the melee combo that forces you to get up close to the boss. So yes, Summoner is the easiest class in the entire game. So, did you play any of these classes? Let me know what you think about my pick of the easiest class for each role in Final Fantasy XIV. If you think any other class is easier, let me know in the comment section down below. So that's about it, boys. See ya!